looking at children's books. And one such book, written by Michal Snunit, and Ha'ish V'Sod HaTzva'im HaNe'elamim, The Man and the Secret of the Disappearing Colors. And I'll just read you, and I'm going to translate. I won't take the time to read just a bit. I won't read the Hebrew, but the expression, and you should all know this if you don't yet, Hamevin Yavin. He who understands will understand. Because when I finish, and I tell you two other little anecdotes as a segue to our session tonight, I want to leave you with the story. So there once was a man who saw the world only in shachor v'lavan, black and white. And when they would say to him, look at the blue sky, he would say, I just see a white sky. And when they would say to him, see that red flower, he was sure that the flower was black. Something's wrong with you, they said. Maybe something is wrong with me. And he would ask himself why he doesn't see colors. And one night, he saw people looking at the moon and saying how bright it was and that it was even laughing. But he did not see this. And he began to cry and cry and cry, so much that he didn't sleep that whole night. He was so overwhelmed with feeling as if something was wrong. And he said, maybe in the morning. And when the morning came, sure enough, after a night of crying, suddenly he opened the curtains, and screamed, I see colors, I see colors. How beautiful. But then he said, I don't know how to call these colors by their names. But the people said, don't worry. We will teach you. We will teach you the name of the different colors. One of my, moving along, favorite things through the years while teaching is I'll be teaching a certain subject, and then when I'm outside in the real world, something I read, something I see, something I'm involved in, makes me think of what I'm teaching. And I love that because it makes me feel that it's really a part of me. And two such things happened this week with regard to our subject, Megillat Esther. So there are several English-speaking theaters throughout Israel. And there was one that is called Lagon, which stands for Light Opera Group of the Negev, the South. And they are putting on, beginning next month, The Wizard of Oz. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And in the paper, the director is saying something we all know, that it can be, even though children enjoy it, different layers of understanding. And he says the following, and I think you'll quickly see what it has to do with our Megillah. Nothing in the fantasy of Oz is as it seems. The Tin Man, who says he doesn't have a heart, is emoting more than any of the other characters. He's crying all the time. The Scarecrow, who doesn't have a brain, is actually the clever one. The Lion, who believes he's a coward, in the end is not at all cowardly. And the man, who claims to be a great wizard, turns out to be a fast-talking con man. Yet, he continues in this role of authority, even when he's been found out. So naturally, I think of our characters, and perhaps one, despite being a buffoon, carries on, etc., etc. The second time that I was aware that I'm thinking all the time about our sessions, it's exactly a year ago that I told you about our beloved Saki losing his wife, because Monday was his wife's year memorial. And Nechama and I went first to the cemetery. That's where I was looking to get to on Monday. And then there was learning and wonderful words by several people. Alon, one of his 4 children, drew an analogy between his mother, Orna Zichrona Livracha, and the different days and times Megillat Esther has historically been read depending on the community's location. A fortified city, not. And each population, Alon points out, is different, but it is the exact same Megillah each community reads. Similarly, Orna was the same person in essence with everyone, but she did have the ability to speak differently to each of the many diverse individuals with whom she interacted. So what's my thought? Can we say the same of the characters in the Megillah? Do they have an essence that remains throughout? Particularly those who easily trade in their loyalties, to have in the back of your mind as we begin. A bit of a review. When we first met Achashverosh, he was consumed with power. With the attempt on his life, his security, his own security, becomes his obsession, together with a mistrust of everyone. Hence, Haman's singular appointment. Mordechai understands that it will be Haman's desires rather than the truth that will determine right and wrong. This should all sound familiar. Mordechai joins those before him who embraced civil obedience. And to what extent? To the extent that he was willing to ask his dear cousin, who he adopted as a child, to risk her own life. Esther evolves, putting her people's safety ultimately over her own. And Haman, exalted over all the princes and servants of the king, laden with riches, a guest of the queen, and yet, is he happy? Let me share the screen. Okay, we see human behavior and no surprises. Yes? Okay. So, what does Haman say? Remember, this is after Mordechai has not bowed down to him. But all this is worth nothing to me. Every time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting in the king's gate, and Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said, let them make a gallows 50 cubits high, and in the morning say to the king that they should hang Mordecai on it and go to the king to the banquet joyfully. The matter pleased Haman, and he made the gallows. What's the significance of the height of the gallows, which towered over most of the city's buildings? Please unmute yourself when you want to share an answer, and please do share. What is the significance of the gallows? Could have been, just a normal height. What is the message that that gallows is meant to give? Anyone?
Is the wife being sarcastic by saying the height when it's like impossible to hang a man from that height?
I don't think she's being sarcastic. Interesting that, first of all, that the wife is giving Haman advice, but there's a message.
Bracha.
Picture that gallows at such a height. So it's not just enough that it's going to kill Mordecai. Marlene?
I think there's two reasons. I think
Yes.
number one, from that height, people all over the city are going to be able to see Mordecai swinging in the wind. I think the other reason is that it's almost as if it's showing his God, look, you could not save this man. And so they built it as high as they possibly could to reach up to the heavens where they assumed his God was.
Very nice. Very nice. Anyone else?
I didn't see the second reason as I agreed with the first, and I can see the second one. I thought in terms of the height that it showed his incredible capability, that he could accomplish something so magnificent, and which he would think would be reflected on how capable he is to be able to build something that high. I don't know how easy it would be in those days.
Okay, so he's still looking to impress.
It's a power statement. It's a power statement.
Yeah, I think all that you're saying is true, but certainly he wants to make it clear that he is opposed to the message that Mordecai has been giving. And what is Mordecai saying? By him not bowing. What is that symbolic of? And Haman wants to say, no way. In one word.
Control. Oh, sorry.
Mordecai, what is Mordecai trying to show? The fact that he won't bow.
That he answers to a higher power.
One word.
God.
He can put up resistance. Okay, that's a word that our people has embraced in many situations, unfortunately, whether it's physical or spiritual resistance. And Mordecai is showing, I don't care what power you have, but I am, and hopefully my people are going to resist you. So that's just one example of, again, a theme that I like to every now and then repeat as we're studying Bible, that every detail has significance. We don't take the time every class to look at every bit of significance, but okay. Now, Esther's first banquet ends, and our thinker, Hazony, suggests that with Achashverosh beginning to wonder about a possible relationship between Haman and his wife, as she had hoped he would, because she was looking to drive a wedge between the two, feeling that would be a good strategy. So it's no wonder, if we look at the next text, that on that night, the king's sleep was disturbed. What do you think Achashverosh is afraid of? He's
Of
feeling
losing Esther.
threatened again. Bev?
He's afraid of losing Esther, perhaps, because, she first asked for him without even asking for Achashverosh.
Yes, he is afraid of losing yet another wife, and in particular, Esther. Anything else?
Bracha, it seems to me it also,
Brenda?
the thought to me would be that he'd be concerned about the power that Haman has.
Yes, he is panic stricken. Hazony says when he realizes that Haman, who was granted the right by him, but he was granted the right to eliminate all opposition and had complete freedom of action, freedom which might, in Achashverosh's mind, and more importantly his heart, lead to even doing away with the king. So he is panic stricken. It would keep me up. So now, what does he do? And he, Achashverosh, ordered to bring the book of the records, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordechai had reported about Bigtana and Teresh, two chamberlains of the king, of the guards of the threshold, who had sought to lay a hand on King Achashverosh. And the king said, "What honor and greatness was done to Mordechai on that account, saving my life." And the king's servants who minister before him said, "Nothing was done for him." Achashverosh is thinking, wow, this Haman might have even been willing to kill not just him, but also his wife. And he now is looking to kill the person who saved him. Now, notice in verse 3, what is happening now that hasn't happened for a while? His servants say something to him. He's beginning to engage with people who have worked for him. Remember, for a while, when he put Haman in charge, that was the only voice. Achashverosh is beginning to come back into politics and listening to others. And there has been a shift here in political favor. Haman now ends up leading Mordechai on that horse, unlike what he thought was going to be, and he takes him around the square. Now, what does Haman's humiliation signify? Well, Hazony says, but there is more here as well. For Haman's humiliation is also a confession before a city that had gaped, as someone mentioned a few minutes ago, at the height of his gallows only that morning, that all for which Haman had hoped is in fact vanity. The Jew cannot be defeated because in the end, his word does stand. No man may claim for himself the authority to dictate truth, a theme Hazony spoke of last week, to elevate his perspective into the absolute, which Bracha Feder mentioned earlier. The parade through the streets in which the idolater concedes the potency of the truth beyond himself, outside himself, is none other than the retelling of the dream of Jewish faith, that the idol be brought down to its proper size. And this is where our father comes in, Avram, that the figurine of gold be recognized as a lump of metal in the hand of man, that each idol, as the rabbis had it, should bow down in recognition of the truth, in so doing, bringing upon itself oblivion. What is the problem with making someone into an idol? Why are we told to never idolize anyone, even a wonderful person?
Because people are human and they make mistakes. They're not God.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you'll be very disappointed. And here we have Haman, who assumed that everything that he was preparing was to honor him. And within a few hours of people seeing what he achieved, whoever mentioned that he was able to build that gallows at that height, vanity. Vanity.
Bracha. So,
Yes.
Bracha,
Yeah.
I unfortunately missed your class last week, and I was wondering if there was ever any mention made apropos of what we're talking with the height of the gallows, etc. And knowing that there were 70 different communities speaking different languages that were spoken, if there was ever any comparison made to the Tower of Babel. Because I would imagine that Achashverosh would be very terrified, not being able to control, not knowing languages, that the person who is in charge of all of these, everything's being communicated to him via Haman, and there would always have been an issue of trust. But I was just wondering if, because of that Tower of Babel is such a significant situation, it seems to me there's a similar situation here.
Well, that's a very interesting thought, Esther. You'll have to let me ponder that. But as far as Achashverosh being worried about that, I don't picture him as even thinking. First of all, I don't picture him thinking. And I certainly don't picture him at a time like this thinking about people in a I want to say in a purely objective or cognitive way, looking to take over.
I don't look at it as in exactly this situation, but having even put Haman into that position, and not to get into politics too much, but with the scandal that came out via Trudeau and McKinsey, that he's basically a puppet. Everybody knows he's been a puppet to some, global groups, but that he has absolutely no capability of running a country. He hasn't got a background for it. And so he relies on what he considers to be the experts. And I would imagine Achashverosh would feel, well, he doesn't feel capable of controlling that large an area.
Well, you said yesterday, thank you. You said you weren't here last week. And in fact, we talked about the fact that Achashverosh, with the mistrust, once there's an attempt on his life, wants to escape, doesn't want to have anything to do with this. So he put all the power into Haman's hands, trusting him.
Right.
And so that's the way it was. He's not concerned, oh, I need to bring in somebody who's going to think better than me. Not at this moment. Okay. Now, why is Achashverosh on the road to appear, we've used that word before, appearing concerned with Esther, with Mordecai. Why? Is it just gratitude for Mordecai having saved his life? Is he being sympathetic to them? What do you think? What motivates? What's his real motivation?
Bracha, I think he's being I think he's being motivated by fear. I really think that he sees Esther and Haman as maybe being plotting against him. And so he said, you know, I better look into this a little bit more. And he actually probably does remember the attempted coup from before, and that people had tried to really have him relinquish his power, and he's afraid that it's going to happen again. So he figures, I better take some action.
Absolutely. And you have a foreshadowing in your comments, as we see in this next text, when Haman and Achashverosh come to the second banquet, to which Esther is invited both. So the king and Haman came to drink with Queen Esther, and the king said to Esther also on the second day during the wine feast, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, and it shall be granted." Exactly what he said the last time. And the last time, the only thing she's willing to ask for is to meet again. And Queen Esther now replied and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, may my life be given me in my petition and my people in my request." So now she, as we said, has evolved, and she is not hesitating, but is very clear that there is something very serious going on. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. Now, had we been sold for slaves and bondswomen, I would have kept silent, for the adversary has no consideration for the king's loss. And King Achashverosh said, and he said to Queen Esther, "Who is this? And where is he? Who dared to do this?" And Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy, this evil Haman." And Haman became terrified before the king and the queen. And the king arose in his fury from the wine feast to the orchard garden. And Haman stood to beg for his life of Queen Esther, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. Then the king returned from the orchard garden to the house of the wine feast, and Haman was falling on the couch upon which Esther was, and the king said, "Will you even force the queen with me in the house?" The word came out of the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face. Then said Harbona, one of the chamberlains, before the king, "Also, behold the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke well for the king, standing in Haman's house 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on it." And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger abated. Getting back to Marlene's comment, and I said this would speak similarly. Tell me, why did Achashverosh leave the room? He gets in a fury. He hears that Haman was going to cause harm to Esther and to the Jewish people. Now, we're not so sure that he's so concerned about the Jewish people, but certainly Esther. Why does he leave in a fury?
May want to get a collection of himself. So he's perhaps thought he could unwind a little before he spoke.
Okay, anyone else?
Along the same lines, this is the man he trusted with everything.
Go
And
ahead,
now
Michael.
this same guy is plotting to kill his wife. And so, I mean, it must be such a shock. And as was just said, he has to collect himself and come up with a very quick and really strong response.
Okay, yes. And as we heard before, he has lost control. The one person that he did trust, he's thinking to himself now, as Michael just said, his wife, first of all, he finds out is a Jewess, and he's wondering, did Haman know this? And as Michael just said, he was going to kill my wife because she's Jewish. Was he going to annihilate her? So all of Achashverosh's efforts to gain security, his own security, seems for naught. He's alone again. Now, look at verse 9. Then said Charbona, and we met Charbona earlier on when Achashverosh was talking with his chamberlains. But now, interestingly, Charbona, one of the chamberlains before the king, says, behold, the gallows that Haman made for Mordecai. That indicates Charbona knew what was going on, just like Mordecai knew what was going on. And he tells, basically, Ahasuerus what he should do now. Now, why is that so interesting? Aside from the fact that we see Ahasuerus is still not making decisions on his own, but still needs other people to tell him what to do. But Charbona has been silent. That means here he's reminding the king that Mordecai should be honored. But if Charbona knew that Haman had built that gallows to kill Mordecai, why didn't he speak up? And what's making him speak now? This is crucial to our discussion of politics and human nature.
I think this shows that the people feared Haman. They did not love him. They probably hated him and they feared him. And here was his chance to finally, get, okay, now I can maybe get this guy. Up till now, he would be afraid to say anything because Haman was too powerful. But this is his chance to say something and maybe end this guy once and for all.
Exactly. When people feel that such and such a power, a person is strong and he's in the position of power, of course, they're going to side with him. Most would naturally do that. And that's what Charbona did. Now that he sees that Ahasuerus wants to do away with Haman, then Charbona easily trades in his loyalty to Haman now to Mordecai. And Charbona is an example of the following analysis observation that Hazony makes. Considerations of political interest prevail over every other motive. Follow very carefully. That politics makes for strange bedfellows is well known. But the more important implication of this maxim that is emphasized in the biblical text is this. In order to secure the success of any political campaign or effort, regardless of the loftiness of the goal, one must cultivate and make use of such allies. Sounds very cynical. The great majority of men who will side with power and who will never lift a finger to help the Jews or anyone else unless it is made evident that such support is in their own interest. This is the case so universally that it amounts to a natural law of politics. Strength attracts strength, and power attracts power. He goes on. The book of Esther sticks close to the gritty functioning of the common political world, one in which no one stood to defend Vashti when the king was poised to destroy her, in which no one stood to defend Esther or the other women when they were to be raped by the king, in which no one joined Mordecai in refusing to bow to Haman, in which no man stood with Mordecai to openly oppose the extermination of the Jews at the word of the king. Indeed, not one among the mighty and the many of the empire dares to stand up against Haman in anything so long as he is, and I want you to fit in the completing word.
In power.
In power, strong, absolutely. And I think we see this in all different communities, whether it's on a world level, when it's on a city level, a national level, a board. And let's say you wanted to side with somebody who's strong because you thought it would lead to good, but sometimes that's not the reason. It's just you want to be with the people who are going to remain alive. Now, Esther, in these psukim that we just read, appeals to Achashverosh in three parts.
Okay.
Now follow closely because I'm going to ask you to tell us how she appeals to him with three different elements. Three. And Esther resumed speaking before the king, and she fell before his feet, and she wept and beseeched him to avert the harm of Haman the Agagite and his device that he had plotted against the Jews. By the way, interesting. This is happening a couple of months after this banquet. And nothing has happened. Now, what might be a reason? Either that the king, as I said earlier, isn't really concerned about the Jewish people, and he certainly heard that there's a decree for them to be annihilated. It's possible that he has avoided Esther, feeling betrayed by her not being honest about her identity, but it is 2 months. Now, she comes, even though not invited, once again. Then the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. And she said, now the appeals begin. If it please the king, and I have found favor before him, and the matter is proper before the king, and I am good in his sight, let it be written to rescind the letters, the device of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I see evil that I will befall my people, and how can I see the destruction of my kindred? So you've got these 3 psukim in front of you. How would you divide them? Appealing, I'm saying, in 3 different ways. Political pressure, all elements of political pressure. How does she reach out to him initially? Look at verse 5.
She seems to be complimenting him here, what, his own power. And again, if she's found favor with him, because she's found favor with him before, and, I just think she's in a way complimenting him and his power and
I
his
think you're right, but
connections.
she's doing that intending on making him feel good, that she's concerned with what's his interest. And so she uses the words, it's 2 parts, the first appeal. If it please the king, whatever you like. And then second part, and if I have found favor before him, then please do such and such. And that second, if I have found favor, that's a bit more personal. Esther is actually saying, do the right thing because you like me. There's something very impressive with how Esther is talking here, that she has the guts. And you'll see as we continue that it's very impressive what she is willing. She begins in the standard way that you would say, I recognize that you should be doing this. If it interests you, that will look good. That will look good. But then she goes on to say, if I have found favor with you, you should do it because you like me. And we all sometimes do things for that reason. Okay, now what's the second? She's appealing to what as she goes on?
She's appealing to his emotions also.
Emotions regarding what?
Because she's literally saying, if you like me, you will do it.
Yes, okay, yeah, for sure, for sure.
But also she bows down to him and weeps in front of him. And that's also a form of, feel sorry for me, please, it's a begging.
But Bracha, the other thing that she's doing is she's appealing to his position as the king. I mean,
And she expects what?
If this is a matter that you think is important, even it doesn't matter if I think it's important. If you think it's important, then act upon it.
Okay, and that's how she begins. And then and that would not surprise us. But the fact that she goes on, because maybe she doesn't have faith that will be enough. The fact that she goes on and says, then do it for me. Okay, yes.
And then Bracha,
Brenda.
she goes on, and we've already seen that he follows the advice of other people.
Yeah.
So she couches it in that humility and appealing to his, but by the same token, she's telling him what to do.
Okay, and she actually, Hazony says that she is appealing to a sense of justice, or at least for him as a king to have an appearance of a sense of justice, that you've got to do the right thing. I and my people, forget about me, my people will be annihilated. That's wrong. That's wrong. And she says, how can I see the evil? She's calling it evil that will befall my people. And how can I see the destruction of my kindred? He should understand. Now, why I say she's so impressive, because what she is daring to do, and we know how self-consumed he is, she's steering him to look beyond his infantile desires, Hazony calls it. And saving the Jews is the right thing to do. Zeu, that's it. So she's appealing to him as a king. She's appealing to at least an appearance of a sense of justice. And he's no doubt not alone in that as far as political leaders go. And what she's saying is the policy, to quote Hazony, of the state must square with reality, my reality. That's right up there with Vashti not being willing to come to be shown off. Absolutely. And the third, she's appealing, as we said earlier, to, okay, you don't want to save my people, you don't care about the Jews, but you'll lose me because I'm Jewish. And don't think I'm going to stay around and let my people be annihilated as I watch. So she's also appealing to his fear of losing her, as we referred to earlier. What do you think of this, Esther?
I think she's a very self-confident woman who knows Achashverosh very, very well, because she's been able to appeal to him in a way that she believes will work. And she's put herself on the line. She's either alive or dead at this point with him.
Yes. Okay, we said last week when you weren't that there was at first hesitation, but in time she evolved, and that's to be commended, Anyone else?
I think she's got chutzpah. Capital with a capital C.
Absolutely. And if Hazony is reading her correctly, it's making me think that we've said this before, that some of the women in our Tanakh have been portrayed as being the wisest, powerful in a positive way. And it's later on that the rabbis brought us down. Because if you look at the roles that they've played, really. Okay. And Hazony says, it is in such a world that man lives unless he makes it otherwise. And it is according to its rules that Mordechai must play to win. So what game is Hazony saying Mordechai has to play? It sounds as if there are things that he has to do, will do, that he wouldn't necessarily do, but in order to survive, you have to do A, B, and C. And why does this very brief sentence sum up God's intention for all people? Meaning, we are not meant to live, as they say, in a china cabinet, where if you stay there, there's no chance of anything breaking. That's not what God had intended. So there's that constant struggle. We have the values that he's given us, the mitzvot that he's given us. But as the storybook said, it's not all black and white. That's a very difficult situation to be in. But if you want to be part of the world, you have to live realistically. Unless you're willing to go off, whether as an individual or as a country, and be secluded. Would that be the better thing to do?
As you were speaking, I was just thinking that, Mordecai, I guess, would have had the choice if he wanted to avoid his confrontations with Haman to just go and hide and not be at the gate. But being at the gate allowed him to keep, get the information that was needed and to be in touch with Esther and to, hear what had happened. So again, his presence and his involvement in all kinds of different things was extremely important.
Absolutely. Now that's also a sense of involvement, because what was behind him initially sending Hadassah to the palace to be part of the choosing of a new queen? Was it that he already had a sense that the two of them were going to be needed as saviors? Or is this, as Hazony had suggested way back, it seems like a long time ago we began on this, that they were moved and evolved also and sensed a change? So it's a message, again, of just how realistic this narrative is, and certainly contemporaneous. Our last text that I'm bringing, in Exodus, it says, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, mi beit avadim. And the English, as I've said before, loses in the translation. I am the Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Anybody want to translate that differently? Mi beit avadim. Habayit shel avadim. Avadim is the plural of Eved. Avadim hayinu. Okay? If I really wanted to say house of bondage, I would have said mi beit avdut. So how would you translate mi beit avadim?
House of slaves.
House of slaves. Yes. Now, why is that so significant? Rashi explains, why didn't it say, I'm taking you out of Eretz Mitzrayim and mi beit paro, but there's a point that's being made. And Rashi says, God is making it clear that they are leaving a place that those people, including Paro, were also slaves. Now, you will never, he tells them, be avadim to avadim. Never again will you be slaves to other human beings. You will only be to me. And when we think of ourselves as only being an Eved to God, we don't want to use that word slave, because it sounds as if it's just a matter of submitting to him. But the word eved, the same shorish as avodah, serving, and there's a big difference. Serving God, but with free choice. And again, Mordechai and Esther, do we know for sure their perception or their belief or their behavior regarding Adonai, God, or not? Which leads me to this final question. Are Esther and Mordechai motivated to do all that they do here because of a belief in God? Because we saw Mordechai didn't bow down. Esther tells them to fast. So even if it's not explicitly said, there's a sense of an awareness of praying to God. Are they motivated, in your opinion, by a belief in God and Judaism, or merely a concern for their nation? Or is it both? Anyone?
They
I think-
definitely believed in God, because there was a point where Mordecai told Esther, if you don't help us, help will come from another place.
Yes.
So that's faith in God. He knew, like, he's not making up something. He had faith that God would somehow save them. So there's no question that that's the key behind, in my mind, behind it all. And of course, he wanted to save his people the best way he can.
Okay, Michael. Anyone else?
I think there's a sense also of, lo sisa Hashem Hashem l'kacha l'shav, ki Hashem lo yinakeh asher yisa shmo l'shav. You have to represent God. You can't desecrate the name of God by bowing down to another man. There was a very cute anecdote, a story I saw on YouTube recently, where I forget whose it was, somebody who worked for one of the past presidents went to meet the popes and everybody else. She was a very Orthodox woman. She wouldn't shake hands. She couldn't bow down to the Pope because he had a cross, and she also met Biden. And there were videos showing that she stuck to her principles. This was God's word. She couldn't desecrate, in her mind, her principles by shaking hands or by bowing down to a cross, and they respected her for it. So I think there's very much that sense of, and I used to ponder the first time I heard that, how you don't use God's name in vain. There's so many different ways you think of it, and that's one of them.
Yeah, that's a good story. I saw it as well. Yeah. Anyone else?
Also, just another comment, when you're past the era of Nevi'im, where you are instructed on what to do, you've got to be partners with God, and you have to be able to make decisions to sanctify God's name and to maintain the Jewish people. Because before, we were sort of instructed on what was going on, but we have to be partners with God and make those decisions, because we don't have the Nevi'im now.
Okay, we mentioned that too, but I think that was before last week, Esther.
Oh, did we?
No,
I guess
because
my
that
memory's
was our
not
introduction.
great.
That's fine.
Maybe that's, you know what? Maybe that's why it came to mind. Sometimes you don't know where you got your thoughts, right?
You got it here.
Right.
That was a case for trying to understand why in this narrative God is not mentioned. Precisely to say the Nevi'im are gone, and it's now you to realize what you have to do, and I'm not going to be giving it all to you, God is saying to them. He's still there. He's still there. He's still here. But God is constantly wanting us to be partners with him. Exactly. Exactly. Yes. David, you have to unmute yourself. Okay? Where'd you go?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Do you have me now?
Yes,
Okay, sorry, I came a half an hour late. It's regarding a dentist.
do
Better
you
to
have a
have,
note?
it's better to have dental problems than mental problems, right? I should know. Retired physician.
Okay. Yes,
Was Esther Queen during this confrontation, during this discussion? Was she, they call her Queen Esther? Was she already?
yes, yes, yes.
She was queen. Yesterday, Beth Tikvah at the Lunch and Learn, I don't know if anyone was there, but it was about art by the most famous artists in Christianity. They were very taken by the idea of Purim and Haman and Mordecai, very taken. And a lot of their art, it has this confrontation between the three of them. Esther could be falling down, and Haman. They all portrayed it differently. I mean, they even made woodcuts about this same confrontation, and it was on when a woman got married. That it was on her trousseau. It was on there were features from Purim on the torso. I don't know what they thought about the Jews, but I guess we do know what they thought about the Jews. But this was a Christian thing, very, very much involved with Purim. And
yeah.
If I might, in a lighter mood, I hope I'm not offending anyone. But falling and weeping, isn't that a feminine wile?
What's your point?
My point is,
Before I decide if you're offending anyone.
it's very hard for a man to ignore a woman's tears. It's extremely hard. And I don't think it was intentional. Sometimes it might be intentional. I don't know, but it's very hard for a man to ignore a woman's tears. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'll be
Okay.
down in a few minutes.
The comment about the art. I have mentioned probably last year that artists have taken so much from the Bible, and they're considered, I would consider them their own commentators. You know, their artwork, their pieces reflect their interpretation. And that's very similar to our different commentators that read the same verse and can read something different in them. For sure, for sure, for sure.
Bracha,
Dan,
I was thinking about this whole analogy between your depiction of Achashverosh and what was going on politically. Gorbachev, after the Soviet Jewry movement was successful and he was out of power, I heard an interview recently that when he came to the United States and the journalist was asking him, what a wonderful guy you really were, because, you know, you let all these people out, you let Natan Sharansky out, and there was a long pause. And Gorbachev said, no, I wasn't such a great guy. It wasn't in our best interests to keep these people any longer. These demonstrations that were going on in Washington and the marches, and it was something that I never realized could be so detrimental to our country. So we figured, listen, it's in our best interest to let them go.
wasn't that honest?
Uh-huh.
So you can draw an analogy and a direct line to this story that we just read.
Bracha, I have a question when you're ready.
I guess I'm ready, Elliot.
Oh, okay, my computer is being repaired. I'm glad you're hearing me. Here's this. I don't want to get too much into end days, but I've heard more than once that it's believed that I guess in Messianic times, the only holiday that will be observed will be Purim. Have you heard that? Does it have such an overarching importance? Have you heard that? And what are your comments about it?
I have heard that. And in the very first session on this subject, we said that the only books of the Bible that in Mashiach sight will remain will be the 5 books of Moses and Megillat Esther. And so I hope we'll get to see if that's true. And just looking forward to 1 week from now, we will conclude with the final part of the Megillah and seeing what steps are taken, what power Achashverosh does give to Mordechai, though it's not the same as Haman, but what he tells him he can do vis-a-vis making sure the Jews are not wiped out, and exploring the decisions Mordechai makes as far as organizing the Jewish people militarily. And in his book, Yoram Hazony, that chapter is called The Morality of the War. So that will be interesting. Okay, I see somebody else is raising. Stephen.
I don't know if this is a question that you want to answer right now. Comparison between Mitzrayim and Moshe with the Pharaoh and Esther and the king, between the 2 events. In the first, it was it was behind the scenes or directly involved was Hashem. It was the basis of us being able to leave Mitzrayim. He was in control. In Purim, this story, as we know, God is not mentioned once. Has this led to the maturing of the people to realize and know that we are responsible for ourselves? Hashem might be in the background, but we have to take the actions.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. That we see that at the Yam Suf, when they're crossing that sea, he needs people to realize that we have to be like Nachshon, the one who finally is willing to put his foot in the water. And even the terminology after leaving Egypt, the words as far as God saving, the Hebrew, which I won't take the time now to go into, but it varies and it indicates whether it's God that's totally behind it or whether people are involved. But yes, that's our claim. And what Hazony's claim is that God has looked for us to mature. We might not be totally there yet, but certainly, and I think that's why Esther is the book that will remain, to make that message absolutely clear. I think it's more that we should have a sense of God's presence that should guide us to knowing how to behave. Because if we have that presence in mind, hopefully, still hasn't happened, but we realize that every single one of us is created in his image. And that's his place now, perhaps more than splitting the Red Sea for us. That's for us to do. But with God in mind. If not, if we don't have a sense that there's something beyond us, then between you and me, I don't know what this is all about. Anyway, yes, Stephen, thank you for ending on that note. And
as usual, Bracha, your messages are extremely high octane. May you continue to enrich us for a long time.
I'm Mashiach site, right?
Amen.
Amen, amen, amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Thanks, Bracha.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.